recording here. So that was the second thing. The third thing, no, third thing has left me. Never mind, it'll come back. But it's just to say that there will be a quiz and the changing of the I state. Okay, so before we get started on continental and African philosophies, I'm assuming you did all the pre-reading and you've looked at all the articles and you know exactly what continental and African philosophies are all about. So yeah, maybe we should just go straight to the quiz then, see how you do. Okay, so before we start, just a quick recap on analytic and continental, well, the difference really between analytic and continental philosophy. Who of you can remember what analytic philosophy was about, or is about? I shouldn't say was about, is about. If you'd like, you can just use the screen and use the text tool. If you want to just type up what you can remember about analytic philosophy on the screen anyway. Yes, yeah, and you're quite right. It is concerned with analysis, with reason sciences. Yes, definitely. Analytical is logic based. Definitely, you're all correct. Any other things you can remember about analytic philosophy? Yes, classical approach is Frank. Classical approach is Frank. But can you remember specifically which kind, or how do I ask this? Which kind of classical approaches? Language is important, Vanessa, you're quite right. Yes, focus on analysis of language and logical reasoning. These are all correct. So analytic philosophy is definitely about language, about logic, and the analysis of concept. Frank says it's classical approaches. Frank, can you tell me which, I'm going to give it away if I say this, but okay, which continents did analytic philosophy originate on? Western world, English-speaking countries. Well done, Dr. Praveen. You've done your homework. Yeah, no, not Europe, Frank. Not Europe, but you're close. You're close by a couple of thousand sea miles. Gareth, Greece. When all else fails in philosophy, just say Greece. Somewhere it has to be right somewhere. But yeah, Dr. Praveen is right. It is English-speaking countries, specifically, obviously, America and the UK. Guys are funny. Yeah, Greece. Okay, so that is analytic philosophy. If we look tonight at, we're going to be taking a look at continental philosophy, and the most obvious difference is, and I'm going to ask Frank, what's the most obvious difference, Frank, between the two, specifically related to their origin? So if analytic philosophy is English-speaking countries, Anglo-American origin, what would the continental philosophies be? Origin be? Gareth, you're not allowed to answer. Okay, I give up. Oh goodness! Thank goodness for Dr. Praveen, who brings us back to normal reality and has sure gives me faith, a little bit of faith and hope for the future. Oh, gee, Vanna, wow! Did you quickly Google that? Well done. So that, Leanne, thank you. The basic difference of origin is really that continental philosophy did originate on the European continent, and where analytic philosophy was more about, or is more about, I shouldn't use the past tense, more about, as we correctly said, logically analyzing concepts. Continental philosophy has more to do with um, themes related to history and politics and um, things, things regarding specific issues, gender issues, and racial issues, and the self-consciousness and freedom and the free will. Okay, Praveen, sorry. I shall do that. I shall do that. I know some academics don't like that, but I'm also like that. I don't, yeah. That's perfect. Thank you for that. Okay, so continental philosophy, it totally excludes logic. It doesn't focus on logic at all. It's more about the essence of life, more about um, your experiences. You'll see that in all the four continental philosophies that we're going to take a look at tonight. You will see experiences are the core, the crucial thing around which the philosophy is based. So these philosophies, they don't necessarily reject the natural sciences or scientific methods, but um, they're not so focused on them, and they're more concerned with synthesis, with relationships, with um, synthesis between the current modern lifestyle and history, between the individual and the society within which the individual functions or lives. So it's, yeah, it's it's a lot more creative and fluffy as opposed to the analytic philosophies. Okay, so then without getting too carried away, specifically, let's have a look at the four continental philosophies that that is part of your curriculum. There are more, but specifically related to education. And again, you will see that, sure, and that's with all these philosophies. It's so hard. And those of you who've studied philosophy and other um, um, subjects or in other disciplines, it's so hard to draw very strict boundaries around the principles and around the concepts. There's so much gray in between, but each one does have a core, one or two core principles or elements that are specific to that philosophy, or alternately a specific aspect that focuses on a specific discipline. And you'll see one or two of them, yeah, are very a lot more. I can't use the word a lot more, but you can, if you take a philosophy and you apply to a different discipline, it might not have the same emphasis. So in education, these four, the emphasis is, as I said, mainly on experiences, but there's each one has their own little flavor or their own nuance. Okay, so let's move on to the four that we are going to be looking on in continental philosophies is haven't had my glass of wine yet. Phenomenology and hermeneutics and critical theory and postmodernism. You will, I'm sure, recognize one or two, if not all of these. So what I'm going to do is, on this slide, I've really just highlighted the main key elements or key concepts of each philosophy. And then on the next slide, I have specifically looked at each one of these in terms of their use or their relevance in education. So I will be moving kind of between these three slides. So if we look at phenomenology first, the philosophy of phenomenology, Husserl was the kind of founding father of this philosophy. And the core thing really for this is well, in another kind of phrase, it's really called the philosophy of experience. And the important thing here is lived experiences are the ultimate source of meaning. So you cannot attach meaning or value to anything unless it is something you've experienced and lived through, specifically from a first person point of view. So not so much of the perceptions of or perspectives of someone else, but you as the person living the experience. That is where you gain your meaning and your meaning and the value of that experience. So that is the key focus of phenomenology. And Heidegger, who was, he's, yeah, he wasn't pure phenomenology, but he started in phenomenology, and he came up with this phrase, obviously German phrase, das Sein, which I'm sure you've heard of, and it really just means Spongili, all good, no worries. I see you've got network issues. Completely understand. Thank you for excusing yourself. I appreciate that. Yeah, das Sein, which really just means your existence and your just being in the world, and being focused on your encounters, the being. Thank you, Frank. That's fast. Yes, the being and the being, the existence of the being. So phenomenology really just then is just consciously or being consciously aware of your experiences, and that is how you get meaning. So they don't really look at causal relationships. So cause and effect relationships, and they also try and analyze and describe and give meaning to experiences as free as possible from preconceptions, presuppositions, anything, anything pre-existing, really. So it's like the being in the here and the now, if this is making sense. So in education for phenomenology, as an educator or in the lecture room, you are looking to work with your learners or your students in a way that you create internal motivation within them, the desire to learn. So you obviously need to be engaged in activities where you create curiosity. They're inquisitive. They want to know. They want to experience as much as possible. The whole idea is to make them aware of their existence, and make them aware of the importance of creating a knowledge base of their own experiences. So yeah, not so much of what other people are experiencing, but of their own experience. So for example, if you were, let's say you're an English lecturer, just trying to think how this would work in another discipline, but let's say you're an English lecturer and you are doing a literature text that is written by an English person. You would then, in phenomenology, as a lecturer, you would try and help your student to explain or understand or to be aware of their experience of that literature based on their perspective, if that makes sense. So an easy one would be someone who is not English speaking. How do they experience that piece of literature? I don't know if that's making sense. But um, your whole focus is on trying to get your learners, your students, sorry, I should use the word students, your students to understand how their prior knowledge, how their prior understandings are are brought into into perspective for new information, so that they can then sort of kind of internalize it, reflect on it, and then I suppose act on it. Um, so it's basically explaining to your students that learning is not static. Okay, we know that, but it's a process of structuring and restructuring and modifying and remodifying their their being in the world and all the experiences related to that. So removing theory or theoretical prejudice is more the thing. So preconceptions, anything out there that exists that might be biased. So trying to get them to examine the experiences or examine things outside of prejudice, outside of preconceived ideas, and then to discover the essentials of those experiences for themselves. So that's really the core of phenomenology. There's a lot of focus on individuality, individual knowledge, individual opinions, individual values. So very focused on the individual student. So that's phenomenology in a very, very small nutshell. Are there any questions or any comments anybody would like to add to that? Leanne, we used to use course material that referred to James Herriot animal stories. Those are young previously, they had no idea. Yes. Yeah, that is a big thing. And I don't know, any of you are ex or are teachers, but it's quite a big thing um, in the schools these days, because 90% of the teachers are from a dominant Western kind of like culture, and teaching students or children from all different cultures, we have so many cultural assumptions and cultural blind spots that, yeah, it makes teaching quite quite challenging these days. It's not as easy as just picking up your curriculum and going through the motions. And I think that's where phenomenology can help a lot, because it's not only helping the student to understand their experience within any lived experience, but um, helping the others around them to understand that it's going to be different for everyone. So yeah, it definitely, Leanne, is definitely a thing in the classrooms these days. Okay, any other anybody else want to add to that? Phenomenology. Again, this is really just the key elements. There's so much more to it, but yeah, I think just for the purposes of, obviously, just we have only an hour, but if it's something that interests you, to definitely then pursue it and do some more research. Okay, then I'm going to move on to hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is an interesting philosophy because it actually didn't really start out as a philosophy. I don't even think you can really call it a philosophy. I don't know, those of you studied philosophy, you might disagree with me, but it's kind of more of a subcategory, or it's more of a theme, or that's all good, Taryn. Please don't worry. All good. Please, you guys, I don't have a problem with, I know it's load shedding and it's crazy. Stage 6. I mean, we had 4 hours this morning of load shedding. So please don't worry about it. The recording will be available. So hermeneutics is really just, it's not really a philosophy as such. I don't think it's strong enough to be called a philosophy. It's more of a subcategory within phenomenology, actually. So, and it actually, hermeneutics started with people analyzing biblical texts. That's how it started. And the analysis of these biblical texts was trying to figure out or research or investigate the history behind the text, and looking at the history of when the text was written, how is that relevant to us today? And so that is kind of the basis or the start of hermeneutics. But so the core part, or the core element, is the analysis of understanding. So the analysis of how our cultural traditions, our language, um, just historically who we are, how does that make us able to understand life, if that makes sense? Not really. But hermeneutics is really just about interpretation. If you just remember that word interpretation, you'll be fine. So it's again looking at experiences. It's looking at day-to-day things, really, and trying to interpret them. So, for example, if you're in social conversation and your friend tells you um, they've been retrenched or anything like that, your interpretation of his or her experience of that's hermeneutics. So it's understanding how they are going through the process and interpreting everything that's around them. Um, it's yeah, it's really just the art of understanding and interpreting. It goes beyond logical analysis. It doesn't really look at logic. It really just looks at the actual understanding and interpretation of a given situation for any specific person. In the classroom, the lecturer who practices the philosophy of hermeneutics would be helping students to understand difficult subjects by investigating their prior knowledge and then getting them to speculate the new content based on prior knowledge. So it would be almost like prediction. I know, again, this is used a lot in English when, especially the younger grades, when they do reading, they show them pictures of the story, or they just give them the title, and then they ask them to predict what is going to happen in the story. And that's a little bit of hermeneutics because they're using their prior knowledge and their any preconceived ideas. And the beauty of something like that, and you could do it with students as well in your lecture rooms, is to give a title of something or a picture and to ask people what is happening in this picture. And you actually pick up a lot about cultural differences, cultural preconceived ideas when you do that, because somebody will give an idea or describe the picture or speculate what's going to happen after the picture based on their prior knowledge and their experiences. And you really learn a lot like that with regards to cultural differences. I always used to enjoy that, doing that at school. So the hermeneutic lecturer will help students understand how their understanding is happening, and also that understanding something is not static. It's not going to stay like that. It's dynamic. It's never perfect. It's always changing, obviously, as their knowledge base and their experiences change. Um, part of the part of lecturing in this way, you would need to help your students to understand that they are limited in their own understanding and that there is always the perspective of another. And yeah, so that whole, again, it's about experiences, but it's about understanding how you understand your experience, but also realizing that your understanding is going to change. Another kind of like quite a big core thing of hermeneutics is phronesis, which really just is the act or the ability or the skill to contemplate a decision based on, to weigh up the consequences of that decision. And one of the big drives in hermeneutics is really in education specifically, is that we don't do that enough in education, in our classrooms. We don't regularly allow our students to weigh up consequences of decisions. And for the hermeneutics kind of like followers, for them, this is actually quite a crucial gap in our education system, that we don't educate towards that kind of maturity and that kind of responsibility, so that ability to be able to say, okay, I'm going to marry this guy and weigh up the consequence, or this lady, or whatever, or this whatever, and weigh up the consequences and know that, okay, this is going to be the outcome for this is going to be the outcome if I don't do it, and then which is the better one, judging which is the better decision to make. So that is really hermeneutics in education, and they like to address that our our decisions, there needs to be wisdom there, and for them the focus in this education system is too much on content. And yeah, these decisions obviously, if that's what affects our life. I mean, what career am I going to do? What am I going to study at university? What am I going to the marriage advice? That's funny. What am I what am I going to where am I going to live? You know, what school am I going to send my children to? What is my belief system, etc., etc. So those for hermeneutics, those are the kind of things that we should be addressing in our classrooms. Okay. Any any other? And of course, sorry, the last point is addressing attitudes. And I must say, there I'm totally 100% behind hermeneutics. that we should be addressing the attitudes of our students and learners a lot more than what we do. But anyway, that's again hermeneutics in a nutshell. Yes. Why making mistakes is good. Well, there you go. I mean, you learn from them, and also to make them understand that making a mistake is not the end of the world. You know, it's if you don't make mistakes, you're not going to learn. So, okay. Any other comments or anything else about hermeneutics? You'll find hermeneutics comes up in a lot of disciplines because it has to do with interpretation and understanding. So. Um, It kind of does pop up in a lot of disciplines. No? You all good? Okay. Critical theory. Critical theory is one of my favorite philosophies. Oh, again, I don't know if you can really call it a philosophy, but it's an approach or a theory in social philosophy, and it really just focuses on the attempt to reveal um, incorrect or unequal power structures. So it's to reveal the power structures, these and to challenge them. Um, so power structures that then obviously bring about injustice in society. So this whole philosophy focuses on social problems that stem from social structures that are not fair. And the aim of this philosophy is to look at specific ideologies and those that are false, and there's a lot of them, to actually unmask them and to in what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, to unmask these false ideologies and then just to focus on removing or getting rid of economic oppression. That's kind of the main core of critical theory. And again, critical theory appears in many, many disciplines. Frank, when does an approach become a theory? Oh, gee, I don't know. I was hoping nobody would ask me that. Um, again, this is such a gray area. I suppose once it gains momentum and once it gets, becomes quite a force to deal with, and once it kind of becomes, I don't know, maybe there's somebody here who has a lot more knowledge on philosophy in general than what I do, but I think when it becomes intertwined in various aspects of living and society and disciplines, and it has a stable foundation and a stable composition and elements, and then I suppose it's a philosophy. And then the theories kind of just stem from that. Like critical theory is really it's a social philosophy, but it is a specific social philosophy because it specifically focuses only on social structures that are unjust. So yeah, it's a very good question. I don't know. Is anybody else on the call that can answer that better than what I just did? Who's our pro in philosophy? Yeah, there is somebody. in this group who has a PhD in philosophy, isn't there? I'm sure there is. I do remember that. I don't know if she's on tonight. No, nobody? Nope. Yes, feminist. It was a feminist philosopher. You're quite right. Man, I can't remember her name now, but I don't think she's on. Um, Dr. Claire. It was Dr. Claire. I don't think she's on. I didn't see her name come up. I'm going to ask her that question, Frank. Um, I'm going to ask her that question because I think she has done a lot more general philosophy. My philosophy is all based in education. So I'm going to ask her that. But it's pretty much that. It starts off as a kind of a theory and a thought and an approach. And then once it gains momentum and there are more theories related to it, it kind of then just becomes a philosophy. But philosophy has to seep into everything. It can't just be focused on one specific thing. Okay, but I will get back to it. I've made a note of that question, Frank. So critical theory, if we yeah, so where was I? What was I saying about? Oh, yes, about looking at unjust power structures, social structures, trying to end oppression in whatever form. They're very focused on making sure that people, students, children have the knowledge to know that they are being oppressed. So their whole focus is also trying to fuse the theory with action. So critical theory is a very practical kind of like approach. In education, let me just get to that slide quickly. So critical theory in education is offering your students opportunities of understanding that there are different perspectives in society and that there is definitely disadvantaged members of society. Whether they are the disadvantaged or not, the important thing is to acknowledge and to get them to understand that. They're also very clear on real world issues. So they try and move away from anything abstract, but they look at real world issues and what can we do? What attempts can we do to actually respond to these real world issues? And how do we educate our students so that they can then also take up the fight for the cause and um, transform these unjust social structures. Their attention is definitely for the marginalized people, um, and obviously also the non-marginalized or privileged people, to help them to actually uncover their blind spots or or admit or help or facilitate or work towards sort of like dismantling these power structures. Yeah, that's pretty much critical theory. Again, there's a lot about critical theory, and again, it touches on a lot of disciplines. I specifically used critical race theory when I did my PhD. So, yeah, it's just really about unpacking how our racist or non or whatever cultural, whatever bias we have and prejudices we have, how those components are brought about, how those beliefs are brought about, how they are internalized, and then how we can actually dismantle them and well, there's another word for dismantle which I can't think of right now, but basically it's all about confronting social injustices and making our students very aware of them and doing something about it, not just, okay, I know about this and that's the end of it, but actually practically how can we actually help and change. So that is critical theory. even in a smaller nutshell than the others. But any comments there or any questions? Critical theory. If any of these theories, listen to me. If any of these philosophies are not really making sense, please feel free just to email me, or I can always refer you to some good articles. Or I know some of the articles that they've loaded on VC Learn are not, in my opinion, this is my opinion, please do not quote me, but they're not the best. They're not very descriptive. But yeah, so if you're needing more insight or information. Okay, then postmodernism. We did 2 weeks ago, or I think it's 2 weeks ago, we did pragmatism and existentialism. So postmodernism. Oh, sure, it's too late in the day. It's really a combination of pragmatism, existentialism, and a bit of social constructivism. Oh, gee, thrown in as well. It's quite eclectic, but it's a little bit more 20th century, I would say, than the others. So the big thing about, let me just go back to this slide. The big thing about postmodernism is that it is very skeptical, very subjective, very suspicious of reason. Don't really, yeah, they logic and reason, very sensitive to that kind of being too objective and too concise. Agree with the articles not being too, yeah. Um, I actually did address this last year, and they changed some of them, some of the articles, but it hasn't been done very well. I actually even volunteered to resource articles for them. But anyway, but if you are, maybe what I'll do is I'll just put the ones that I have on VC Learn, or I wonder if I could put them on the YouTube channel. I must try that. Or maybe just the links. I could do that. Because yeah, no, and some of them they've been put under learning units, and there's absolutely no connection. I don't know, maybe I thought it was just me, but yeah. Anyway, Praveen, I will look into that and see if I can put some more links on to others. There is one book that is really good, and I forget the author now, but it's an introduction to philosophy book. And you can actually download that from the internet. I must just get the author's name, and I will put it on an announcement, because that's actually a really good one. And what I like about that is that it's it talks in everyday language. You know, some of these philosophy articles, sure, you have to read them a few times and have a dictionary next to you to understand what they're saying. But I will do that. I will definitely give you some more links. Okay, so the postmodernism, yes, as I said, they are very suspicious of reason. They are very critical of anything objective. Um, I'm so glad. I thought I was the only one. I thought, oh, gee, I don't know. Maybe you guys understand these articles. So the postmodernist lecturer or person would try and well, is first of all very politically aware, very critical in their inquiring. They rely completely on concrete experiences, and they even go as far as to say that scientific methods are biased, which I suppose, I don't know, maybe we can open that for discussion at some point. But if you really think about it, I mean, most of our scientific experiments and methods, et cetera, have been created and designed and run and organized and facilitated by dominantly European, English-speaking, Western people. So yeah, probably, I think there's a bit of truth in that, but anyway, that's beside the point. They also believe that, or they have the notion that reality, your reality, or any reality really, is created by those who have the power, and that your reality is based on your interpretation as a person. So there's no objective truth, or eternal objective truth. Whatever is true for you in the situation, the way you've interpreted it, that is your reality. So that is the postmodern kind of like outlook and philosophy. In education, again, similar to critical theory, they also focus on social justice, and they will lecture through that kind of framework. They try also, again, to help students to identify and unmask their beliefs that are not in line with sort of like equality and equity. They're very big on self-judgment and reflection. So they try and get the students to understand what it is that's limiting their freedom in thought or freedom in behavior. Um, a big core element is self-esteem, and so the lecturer would be focused on helping the student to develop their self-esteem. They don't see individuals as discovering their identity. They see them as they need to have their identity constructed. So they will focus on that in the lecture room, helping their students to construct their own identity, helping them to build up their self-esteem. As for them, that's precondition for learning. If a student does not have the self-esteem or the confidence, and they haven't constructed their identity, then learning is not going to happen. They also believe that society can only progress when people are empowered to attain their own individual goals. So again, it's a very individualistic philosophy. A postmodern teacher would be very skeptical about absolute truths. They would stress in their class, again, if I go back to English, they would stress or encourage their students to ask questions, to doubt what has been written, to look for inconsistencies. So yeah, they don't accept anything at face value, really. And the three core things, and again, if we go back to critical theory, specifically critical race theory, they also focus on these three things. But the postmodern lecturer will definitely be what's the word? Clued up or practiced or rehearsed in or well versed in diversity, how to deal with diversity in their lecture room. They will make an effort to actually work on that. It's not just business as usual. They will actually make an intentional effort on how to actually lecture their class or their students through the diversity. Totally inclusive, that is a big focus, a big core element. And the third one is multiplicity, where they will encourage their students to actually engage with other cultures, not just superficially, but intentionally in relationships, getting to know them, maybe even learning their language. So they're very big. The postmodern lecturers are very big on just really making sure that there is what's the word, fair or equally spread out airtime for all the different cultures and perspectives in their classroom or their lecture room. So that really sums up our 4 continental philosophies that we're going to be looking at. And before we move on to African philosophy, we've only got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to have to speed this up a bit. Anything on those 4 philosophies that you'd like to say? Okay, then I'm going to quickly do African philosophy. I don't really want to rush through it, but I would also like you to do the quiz at the end. But African philosophy is the biggest difference, really, is it's communitarian, where all these other continental philosophies and most other Western philosophies for that matter are individually based. So it's all about the individual gaining, the individual learning, the individual questioning, the individual self-actualizing themselves with all these different whatever experiences. The African philosophy is about communitarian community, harmony, being with people, being whole, being free, very specific, obviously, to the African continent. So the philosophies that come out of African philosophy are based on issues that you only encounter on the African continent, like famine and poverty and abuse, racism, all those kind of things, military autocratic military dictatorships, which is also very big on the African continent. So those are the kind of themes within African philosophy. So it's very specific. It's although the other thing about African philosophy is that 90% of what has been written about it has been written about by Western people. So because the philosophy itself was really more of an unwritten philosophy, it's kind of just is part of the African life, their experience, their actions, the nature, the experiences of their society, their God, their religion. So most of it is unwritten, and so a lot of the philosophy that we read about African is written by Western peoples. But now, obviously, late in later years, there have been people of African descent that are starting to write about African philosophy. And then so I sidetracked myself. As I said, they're mostly unwritten philosophies. So the practices and the thinking and the thought processing was passed down or presented in tales and proverbs and myths, etc., and poetry, etc., things like that, which is very different to the Western philosophies. Although they don't focus on the individual, they do, however, there is, however, focus on the individual, the aspirations of the individual, so that those aspirations line up with their community in order to better benefit the community and not be in conflict with their community. Obviously, the big main philosophy in African philosophy is Ubuntu, which I'm sure you've all heard of and you're all very familiar with. So I am because you are, and I am what I am because of who we all are. And it's all about humanity, and it's about that universal bond of the sharing that connects all humans within a community. So that's kind of the main core of African philosophy. And then in education, because it's very specific to the African continent, it's difficult to find examples of this really in education, and I think it's something that we as educators in South Africa could definitely look at and promote and sort of interconnect in our discipline in some way. They also obviously look at reasons that constitute things that the indignity and the inhumanity and the exclusion of certain people on the African continent. How did this come about, and what ways can they offer to bring people into conversation to change these things? Obviously, colonialization and decolonialization and all of that is a very hot topic at the moment, and I think a lot of African philosophy is going to be kind of gelled with that and reworked or reprocessed. No, there's another word. In any case, something. But the the thing with the African knowledge is African philosophy is African knowledge, and that is really just based on knowledge, world knowledge that is relational, that is to do with wholeness and harmony and cultural values that are deeply embedded within the culture. wisdom plays a big role in African philosophy, and because reading and writing was not really, I mean, that wasn't really, that was kind of like brought to the continent, but the whole wisdom of the elders in the tribe or in the community, that was what was the important thing, not necessarily learning how to read and to write. The last thing about African philosophy is the three things that a lecturer in African philosophy would need to focus on is to help their students to understand not so much content, but to help them to understand, help them to build on a skill or to develop a skill of actually listening to the other person, engaging with the other person on a level that they actually hear them, so that it's not the content that they're interested in, but actually how it's told, why is the story told, how did you develop it in this way. And again, looking at African specific issues like, as I mentioned, poverty and hunger, abuse and military dictatorship, etc. Another big thing about African philosophy is moral maturity. And the moral maturity has to be in order to enhance the community. So the students need to um, internalize virtues and honesty and ethics and a sense of responsibility for the benefit of the community, not necessarily for the benefit of themselves. So that's, I hope, sure, that pretty much sums up African philosophy. There's again a whole lot more, and I think it's a very exciting philosophy. Yeah, I do too. I also do, and I think if we as lecturers would focus more on that kind of, again, like the attitudes and the maturity and the decision making skills and the those kind of things of our students, as opposed to, yeah, we've got to do content obviously because they have to pass assessments, but I think we'd be doing our students such an amazing service if we were to really engage with them on this kind of a level where it's about harmony and community and not each one for their own, and competitiveness, and got to get the best job to earn the best money, and all that. Yeah, those things are important, but it's, I don't know, I think we've overcomplicated our lives completely. We need to go back to simple lives. Okay, any other comments or anything before we get to the quiz? You're basically going to have like 2 minutes to do this quiz in, but you're clever, you're smart, you'll be able to do it in. Have you got your phones with you? I do think you should be able to, oh, you should be able to use the link, I'm sure, but let's quickly try. So you're going to have to scan in this QR code, and then it'll take you to a website where there's 10 questions. And then, what have I done with my phone? And then you answer the 10 questions, and yeah, it'll tell you how many you got right at the end. You all good to quickly do that? I'm going to leave you for 1 second. I need to go find my phone. How are you guys doing? Sorry, I mustn't interrupt you.